Jit Singh, who was the first person to enter the battlefield in Kargil, has been lauded for his true and sincere reportage. His book, Flowers on a Kargil Cliff, brings alive several untold stories and captures the zeitgeist of war reportage. He is joined by acclaimed military historian, author, columnist, and army veteran Probal Dasgupta, who has written the best-selling books Watershed 1967 and Camouflaged: Forgotten Stories from Battlefields. Colonel Ashutosh Kale will share from his third book, Rambo, and chronicle the life of Major Sudhir Walia, a hero whose courage and sacrifice continue to inspire. I would now like to introduce our speakers for this session. Vikram Jit Singh is a correspondent of the proverbial trenches and a die-hard romantic who sent miniature alpine flowers from battlefields in letters to his anxious fiancée. The author of Flowers on a Kargil Cliff is a seasoned journalist and naturalist. Embedded with the Indian Army during counter-terrorist operations in Kashmir and the Kargil War, Singh was the only media person to scale enemy bunkers with assault troops. His reporting earned praise for its authenticity. A journalist of 33 years, Singh writes columns on wildlife and the environment for the Times of India and Hindustan Times. Probal Dasgupta is the best-selling author, historian, and army veteran. His book, Watershed 1967, about India's victory over China, has been featured on select lists in Deccan Chronicle, HT, TOI, and BBC, among others. He served in the Gorkha Rifles of the Indian Army and holds a master's degree from Columbia University. He currently runs a corporate consulting firm advising clients on investment, political, and policy risks. Colonel Ashutosh Kale is a third-generation Army officer, a patriot by heart, a rider by aspiration, a naturalist by passion, an officer and a gentleman. Colonel Kale retired as the proud commanding officer of the 3rd Grenadiers from the Indian Army. He has served in Siachen, handled insurgencies in Nagaland and Manipur, and experienced baptism by fire during operations in Kashmir. Today, they are in conversation with Commodore Srikant Kesnur, his 36 years in the Indian Navy, which saw him command 2 ships, tenant a diplomatic assignment in Kenya, lead maritime warfare centers, and helm the Naval History Project. He has been the lead writer and chief editor of 12 books for the Navy. After retirement, he continues to write, speak, and teach about maritime issues at various forums. He also holds a PhD in international studies and 5 postgraduate degrees in sciences and social sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our speakers a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to see a near packed house on a Monday afternoon. In fact, if you can get in some people who are still walking on the aisle there, we'll have a full house. So lovely to see you all. So some of you who were there yesterday in the session where AVM Subramaniam unveiled his biography of General Nanavati, I think the discussion veered around to writing about war and military. And the general consensus was that it is a cup half full. You can either feel bad that there is not enough being written about military issues or war history or historiography, or you can feel nice that there has been a certain resurgence in this, at least in recent years. And the good part about the writing in recent times is that it is aiming to reach out to people. It's aiming to connect to the normal, ordinary, but interested citizen. So I have 3 gentlemen here who've written 3 books which are, I mean, extremely diverse in their range while being within the genre of military literature. So Prabal Dasgupta's Camouflaged is about 100 years, as I call it, between the end of World War I and, as he calls it, 2611. But until now, 100 years. Vikram Jit Singh's is about 100 days of the Kargil War. And then there is Ashutosh Kale, who's written about one person. So you got 3 distinct themes, and you got 3 different approaches. You know, Vikram Jit is a war correspondent who's been there, seen war, as General Kulkarni says he's more of a soldier than a correspondent, and you see his impressive mustache, you can make out that he's a soldier. Pro, Probal is done time in the corporate after being a good infantry soldier. And my friend Ashutosh Kale, uh, there is a story within a story here, ladies and gentlemen. We both same squadron, same course NDA. We were rolling together 40 years ago, and how is that for a story that we are on the same panel 40 years later in JLF? So that's Ashutosh Kale. He did a full tenure in the army and then went after his command. So three authors, distinct perspectives, three books. So let's unpack it from their side. So Prabal, first you. Uh, your last book was Watershed. Uh, Again, a somewhat unknown story, known more to the military enthusiasts, not to the common people, that India actually got the better of China in 1967 at Nathula. The great General Sagat Singh, whose family is here, we are very privileged to have them, Colonel Ranvijay Singh and the family. Great General Sagat Singh led us to that watershed 1967. From there, you move to this wide range. One event to near 100 years. So, how did this book happen? What was the motivation behind writing Camouflaged? As you say, it's less known stories. So, what was the driving force or the motivation behind this book?
Thank you, Commodore Kesnur, and thank you everyone for making it a near-packed house. And we hope to have more stories in the afternoon and get more people fill in the seats that are left. So the question, camouflaged, I would put it this way: 100 years, 10 stories, one book, and that's how it came about. The idea was to also talk about the role of Indian soldiers in the shaping of the destiny of this country, as well as the shaping of the world order as it took place in 1945 and after the two world wars. So it starts from 1910. It starts from 1910 when you had the first Indian fighter pilots. Those days, the fighter, they used to be called the 20-minute club, because the lifespan of a fighter pilot in the First World War was around the same time it would take on a Sunday lit fest to get from one place to the other. So that was the kind of that's how it was. And from there you had, in the First World War, you had Indian soldiers, 1.5 million soldiers, going to Belgium and France, lands that they were not familiar with, fighting the Germans who were not their enemies, and fighting for Britain, which was not their country. And yet they left an indelible mark by their stories, by their adventures at that time. And that was the First World War. Another 2 million in the Second World War. What happened was that they shaped the entire destiny of the world. And I think the cover has 3 Victoria Crosses in front of the Buckingham Palace. That is kind of a portrayal of how the world was shaped. And you had the post-independence era where Indian soldiers, again in a testy neighborhood, they come up with, there are tales coming from there. Then you have the 90s, the 2000s, when the global order changed again, and you had stories which are of slow drip insurgencies, mixed identities, lost identities, etc. So that is the more complex kind of stories. The underpinning thing in all of this is that you have the idea was to explore the intrigue, the vulnerabilities, the human angles of all of these stories. Most of them seen or unseen, and hence camouflaged.
Hence camouflaged. I'll come to the human aspect of the story later, but you said a wonderful thing, that these are stories that in a sense define the word order and tells the story of India through many characters. So that's a perfect segue, Vikram. Now, one of the things that defined India.
Can I just ask the team to play the video?
Yeah, play the Kargil video.
Technical team, can you play, please play the video, please? Yeah.
So one of the things that defined India was the 1999 Kargil War. It's a war that shaped our generation. Many of my contemporaries were involved, seniors were involved in that. Now, you've been a war correspondent. You reached areas where no one did. You went over 14,000 feet, the only man to have had access in those high altitude areas. You've seen war in its raw form, and I'll come to various aspects of that war. But again, the question to ask you is interesting. There were many stories and books that came out on Kargil in the immediate aftermath of the war. For someone who saw it so close hand, your book has come out a quarter of century later. So can you explain in a sense how this war defined your reportage? What about this war? I know you emphasize it's much more than the war. You talk of counterinsurgency in Kashmir, but since Kargil defined our nation in some way, just talk us a bit about this book more.
Thank you, Srikant, for the introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before Kargil occurred in 1999, I was posted in Srinagar as a reporter for the Indian Express. And my only request to the Corps commander used to be that when your troops go into operations in the counterinsurgency, when you hunt down terrorists in villages and you climb mountains where the caves are, I want to be with your frontline troops, where your sepoy or the rifleman is firing. I don't want to be at the back where your commanding officer or your brigade commander or anybody is there, because I want to see what the soldier goes through. So from 97 October till Kargil, I went on numerous operations with the Rashtra Rifles and regular infantry brigades, battalions. And for 3 days, for 2 days, I climbed mountains at night with them. I went into ambushes with them at night. So when Kargil occurred, I told the Corps commander again, I said, I don't want to be in the valleys of Dras or Mashko or the Indus, where the entire media corps is confined. I want to go into high altitude, where the infantry is fighting at the bunkers. Now, because I had been in Kashmir and been with the troops in numerous operations, the Corps commander gave me permission twice to go into high altitudes with the troops and see the battle firsthand. So I think I was the only journalist who stayed the night at 15,700 feet on the Khalubar Ridge in Batalik, where no journalist was able to get, because the roadhead was about 48 hours march sometimes to where the assault took place. So now all these years, I did not put those stories into a book because of two reasons. One, when I was posted in Kashmir, my top boss in the Indian Express was not well disposed towards me personally. So he killed my stories. So I used to go on operations, face the flag as a normal soldier does, and I would find that my story doesn't come out in the newspaper the next day. So it was a big, emotional trauma for me, and it took me years to get down to, taking those stories out and giving them perspective. And I realized over the passage of time that my reportage was slightly different from what anybody had ever done in Kashmir and Kargil. So from that deep well inside me, I took out the stories and I put them in the book. And so there's one chapter, No Kills, where's the story? And it tells the story actually of the soldier also, because, I was in operation for 3 days and we didn't kill a single terrorist. I went at night with them in the ambush. I climbed mountains and not a single terrorist, they ran away. So I came back to Srinagar and my boss said, where have you been 3 days? I said, sir, I was in an operation. They didn't want me to tell where I am, so I had to keep it secret. He said, okay, how many terrorists did you kill? So I said, sir, no terrorists, they escaped. So he said, oh, where's the story? इसमें क्या story है? कुछ और लिखिए जाके. इसमें कुछ नहीं है. एक terrorist भी नहीं मरा आपसे. But the soldier, for 3 days, he's been hunting them. He's been examining every house. He's been, bashing the bushes. He's been opening the haystacks to see if he's hiding there. He's opening the coal stacks in each house. He's opening the cupboards. And there's nothing. And that's what happens in the newspaper. You get a small paragraph, 2 soldiers killed, 2 terrorists dead. That's it. But look at it's the tip of an iceberg. So my book is trying to tell you that what the soldier goes through on ground. So the feedback I get now is that, we understand Kashmir better because we know what the soldier goes through. So in one operation, I was with the 56th Mountain Brigade.
Vikram.
Yeah, I'll just finish off. Which later went to Kargil. And we searched the village of Gundraman for 3 days. 3 battalions. 1 Naga, 25 Rajput, and 15 Assam. And we shot 2 terrorists. That's all. And I know what kind of search we had to go through. Every trunk cupboard had to be opened up. So that's about my...
Lovely. I mean, see, he's telling so many stories within stories, and you can go on, including one where you haven't had kills. But Ashutosh, now that's a perfect segue. Kargil, your protagonist, Major Sudhir Walia, is there. He's the ADC to General Malik. Very decorated guy. 2 Sena medals for gallantry. Simple, humble boy. 9 para SF. Sainik School, Sujanpur, Tira boy. Now he volunteers to go to war and General Malik lets him go. Of course, he dies in a subsequent operation. Very highly regarded. But you write an unusual book because you're much senior to Rambo or Major Sudhir Walia. Normally in the armed forces, we write about people who are much senior, right? We are inspired by them. So this is different. You're inspired, sufficiently inspired by this young man, no doubt a superstar amongst his contemporaries. So how did your book happen? And this is your 3rd book after you've written 2 other stories. So how did Rambo happen?
Thank you, Srikant, and good afternoon. Indian military literature is often bereft of raw human emotion and gripping narratives that you would see in European military literature. I wanted to explore courage and bravery after peeling the deeper inner layer of the inner turmoil, anxiety, and fear that all of us go through in combat. And you can't explore courage and bravery without actually going in deeper. Sudhir's story is very different because I didn't write it because he displayed mind-numbing courage in operation after operation. I didn't write his story because he led the last attack in Kargil and captured Zulu Top just 10 days after landing up in Kargil, after being in a glamorous posting, and he gave it up and came down to Kargil. I didn't write his story because he died a month later, leading a raid on a militant hideout in which he got shot 6 times over. I wrote the story because there are some very, very unique things in his lifespan which he did, which are very different. And I'll quickly just tell you 2 of them, which are there on the book too. Telling you how the man was. And it was only about fighting, but he was driven. He was aflame. There was an incident in which they are in for an ambush, and they ambush certain people, these militants, and one of them gets away. Sudhir runs after the militant, and he chases him up into the mountain. And this militant is a young militant. He enters a cave, and Sudhir, without batting an eyelid, jumps in behind him and crawls into the cave. It's a confined space. He can't even lift his weapon up. And that man has already got his weapon up and he's trying to aim it at Sudhir. Sudhir looks at him and says, "Hatyar rakh, hatyar rakh." And the fear and the anger in his face and his eyes and the entire psychological overpowering that he does to the terrorists makes that man keep the weapon down. He catches him by the scruff of his collar and drags him out of the cave. That's the kind of man Sudhir Walia was. I mean, this is the first time that special forces operations have been dealt with in their raw form, in their passion. There's another story in which he helps out an old man in a village after an operation. because the young son is crying. They transport this old man and his son to a hospital in Sopur. And Sudhir keeps his hand on this boy and tells him that आगे कभी कुछ अगर मदद चाहिए होगी तो मेरे पास आना, I'll help you out. Or if you have anything to tell me, come down. And the boy is very grateful that his father has been brought into the hospital 40 kilometers away through a treacherous night. 6 months later, suddenly there's a boy at the gate, and the man comes and tells Sudhir, there is someone asking for you. He said, I don't know any young boy. He says, he only wants to meet you. So the boy is brought, and Sudhir remembers him as a young boy whose father he had helped. And he says, there's a terrorist in my house. Can you come down and deal with him? An 8-year-old boy. Sudhir is flabbergasted. They launch an operation. They surround the house. That man is told to surrender. He fires back. They launch an operation and they finally end up killing the militant. As soon as he dies, there is a cry raised in the village. And the entire village breaks out in a loud cry of anguish. And Sudhir realizes there's something amiss. He comes out of the house. There's this old man and the young boy standing and they're both crying. Sudhir tries to help them, gives them something, and he says, don't worry, what you did was very brave, and I'm very thankful, and here is some bakshish. So the old man says, साहब आप हमें क्या बख्शीश देंगे? आपने एक जान दी थी, हम उसकी जगह हमने आपको दूसरी जान वापस की है. And the boy says, the man you killed was my own elder brother.
Yeah.
Now, such amazing stories, they had to be told. They had to be told to inspire people and the younger generation.
So, such amazing stories had to be told. Now, ladies and gentlemen, by now you must have realized that they have great store of stories of the army. They've written a little bit about the Air Force, Probal, and I'm sure Vikram. Thankfully, they haven't written about the Navy, which is why they got a Navy man as a moderator here. You know? And there is lots of Navy in the audience, including our esteemed former Navy Chief, Admiral Madhvendra Singh, the former Chief of Naval Staff, whose father incidentally was Army IC number 1. So we have again an Army Navy wing. So Prabal, now human stories are completely there in both their versions, but they're there in yours in 10 different stories, and each one of them fascinating. So you begin with Hardit Malik and Laddie Roy, you go to Haripal Kaushik, lots of other stories, and you end with 2611. Can you, if I can ask you to pick up, it's difficult to ask an author to choose a favorite, but can you pick up the most compelling or the most favorite double? Which is yours? What's the story?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I was hoping that question doesn't come about. But I would put it this way. Let me narrate a little anecdote from one of the stories. All of them are my children. So I've kind of taken pains to look into the sources. So they're all favorites. But there's an anecdote from one of the stories, and this is, if I have a little more time, I'll talk about the other one, but I'll just stick to this anecdote.
Yeah.
No, please, you can put up the slides.
Yeah, put off the slides.
It's a wrong one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I'll tell you when to put on the last slide, but that's later.
Isko baad mein daliye. You tell the story.
Yeah. So, this is a story from 1971. You don't need to look at the slides, you can hear my story. This is a story from 1971. There are 3 Indian Nats taking on 3 Pakistani Sabre jets. And this is above the skies above Boira, which is near Calcutta. So they took on these much more superior Sabre jets that the Pakistanis had got from Canada. And they were fighting over the skies of Calcutta, and these 3 Indian Nats, the Indian planes, brought down 2 of the Pakistani pilots. One of them returned back to Dhaka, which is part of East Pakistan then. But the 2 Pakistani pilots were captured. One of them was shot down by then Flight Lieutenant Don Lazarus, who went on to become he retired as a squad leader, Don Lazarus. But that time, Flight Lieutenant Don Lazarus had shot down one of the Pakistani planes. And the Pakistani pilot was Parvez Mehdi.
Yeah.
Parvez Mehdi was, after the war, he was repatriated back to Pakistan. So this is a story that has the battle and that has the aftermath of the battle. Let me tell you the aftermath, because kahani wahan par hai. What happened? When Parvez Mehdi went back to Pakistan, he was reinstated in the Pakistani Air Force. 25 years later, 1996-97, squad leader Don Lazarus reads in the newspaper that Parvez Mehdi is the new Air Chief Marshal of the Pakistani Air Force. What does he do? He decides to write a letter to the Pakistani Air Chief, congratulating him, saying that, you may not remember, but we met a long time ago in the air. So he forgets about it. Some months later, he gets a response. It's from the Pakistani Air Chief, Air Chief Marshal Parvez Mehdi, replying to Don Lazarus, saying that, yes, I remember, and you got the better of me. But the story goes further, because later, Nawaz Sharif comes to Parvez Mehdi. He's to appoint the new army chief. And Parvez Mehdi and Parvez Musharraf were batchmates in the Pakistan Military Academy long back, in the 60s. So now he has to appoint the new army chief. So Nawaz Sharif goes to Parvez Mehdi and says, what do you think? General Parvez Musharraf, new army chief. So he tells Nawaz Sharif, Parvez Mehdi tells Nawaz Sharif, और किसी को आर्मी चीफ बना दीजिए, इसको मत बनाइए, आपका करियर खत्म हो जाएगा. And those words were prophetic. It's also as a tailpiece. So when the Kargil war happened, Parvez Mehdi was the air chief of the Pakistani Air Force, and he refuses General Musharraf's plea to use the Air Force, saying that it will escalate the war. It goes back to 1971. So that's a story I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So Boira is also this interesting thing that the pilots are captured on ground by Major Panag, or future General Panag. And ladies and gentlemen, you may not know it, but Boira has an interesting naval angle. I'll just give you a small hint. Chiman Singh, there is a Navy Special Forces guy who's crossed over into East Pakistan, and he's on his way back. And he comes and witnesses the Battle of Boira happening on top of him. So everyone else in the Battle of Boira gets a VRC, but Chiman Singh ultimately gets a Mahavir Chakra. So you are the Navy angle to Boira too. So this is now interesting, but since we are running short of time, I'll ask both of you the human angle question. Vikram, you heard about Kargil. Your book has a fantastic evocative title, Flowers on a Kargil Cliff. And lots of your book is about this human interest story. I was personally fascinated by many of a widow who refuses to learn or acknowledge her husband's death, of ashes strewn of an officer, of a temple on top of Tolaling. Was second Rajre for someone who did that?
That was later 12 Jack.
12 Jack. And then you written of the role of donkeys in the war, and then you talk of the Pakistani officer Rommel. So I'll ask you to pick one or two of your favorites, but let me combine the question to Kale to save time. So after Vikram, Ashu, I want you to talk about your book is fast paced. It is super. I mean, it's a biography, but it goes at a super clip. So how do you balance authenticity with creative license and with description? So I want to know that from both of you. Vikram first and Ashu, as brief as you can.
Well, the title Flowers on a Kargil Cliff takes from, I have a passion for flowers, for nature. And when I was in battle in Kashmir and Kargil, I would pick those beautiful little flowers and I would put them in my pocket and send them in letters to my a very anxious fiancée in Chandigarh. Her name is Himani, and I married her later, and she's here. So while we were on this cliff in Kargil, and we were being fired upon, and it was a very narrow cliff, and I nearly fell from there, and these flowers popping out, and I picked them, and the soldier said, "Sir, आप ये फूल उठा रहे हैं, यहाँ युद्ध चल रहा है, आप क्या कर रहे हैं?" तो मैंने बोला, वो मेरी मंगेतर है, वो घबराती है, तो मैं उसके लिए फूल चिट्ठी में भेज रहा हूँ, तो वो उसकी जो घबराहट घट हो जाती है. Now, soldiers are also, human beings. They have loved ones at home. They have their girlfriends, they have their wives, they have their mother and father. So they understood my why I was sending flowers in letters. So after some time, the soldiers saw a little flower peep out of a rock, and they said, "Sir, ये फूल हमारी तरफ से हिमानी जी को भेज देना." So flowers on a Kargil cliff takes from that as a metaphor, as a symbol of war and its human side. So I've also written about a Pakistani officer, Captain Romel Akram, a very brave man whose grandfather named him Romel after the German general because his grandfather fought in North Africa. And Romel, in the battle for 5140 in Dras, he was alone because 16 men were wounded, 6 were dead. So he was firing RPGs on a concerted infantry assault on his position. And then he got the sniper round through his cheek and exiting from his left ear. And they gave him up for dead, but he survived. And he bears this long, huge scar on his cheek. It's like those, those Prussian naked blade fencing scars of the late 19th century called the Mensur scars or the bragging scars, where men used to fence with naked blades. So, his courage tells you also that the young Pakistani officers and soldiers, they fought very hard. After all, in just the Dras sector, the 6th Northern Light Infantry, 5 Mahavir Chakras were awarded in the battles against just 1 battalion, the 6th Northern Light Infantry, of which Romel was one of the officers. So I've tried to get in interviews with the Pakistani officers as to what their perspective was. Now, I've in this book published photographs taken by Romel in October 1998 when he came across the LC in reconnaissance patrols, and we didn't know about it. And those photographs in my book from October 1998, there are 3 photographs of General Musharraf and 3 of his generals across the LOC in Mashko.
Ashu.
So, when I was writing Rambo, I wanted to keep the authenticity and yet keep it gripping. I wanted to create and make the reader feel the real combat situations and yet let it remain fast-paced. I wanted it to be an immersive experience, to transport the reader into the heat of the action, to not only read about those battles, but to feel the tension, the unpredictability, the stakes that are at large over there, the inner turmoil that is happening. While the experiences are my own, the story is his, but I also wanted to explore something else. I wanted to explore this unfathomable space, which the will to survive, wherein gives away to the idea that my death will serve a greater purpose. And I wanted to explore that space. So this has been absolutely cinematic writing experience, and it was consciously done because I wanted to break away from the reportage or the heavier military history books that are written and make the reader feel immersed in those battle scenes. I wanted it to go beyond the cantonments and people who understand military and military subjects. I wanted people who had no inkling of operations to be able to kind of read it and feel energized. War is complex and fast-paced, but when you write about it, it becomes very, very technical and it's very slow. And I wanted to break that mold. And I think Rambo does just justice and probably will usher in a new era of Indian military literature.
So just pause on that. You wanted to make it interesting. So we got about 4 minutes if we want to take some one odd Q&A. So quickly I want to ask you, and I want you gentlemen to give an answer, 1 minute answer to both of you. You as a war correspondent writing in many ways the first draft of history. You as the author trying to make literature more easy, accessible, interesting. What are the challenges in writing about war? Partly your question to General Nanavati yesterday. Challenges in writing about war and conflict. And Probal, to you after them. You know, I'm sure with all this, there's probably unwritten stories. So is there an unwritten story that you want to talk about? But very quickly, less than 1 minute
I'll
each.
just keep it short.
Yeah.
When you write about a war hero in India, you carry a lot of weight as an author because you need to do justice to his memory, and you're weighed down by the memory, the halo that he carries, and you cannot go wrong. So that was the biggest challenge that I faced, because it was not a faceless story. It was the story of a man who had been awarded the Ashok Chakra, Sena Medal, like Srikant said, and he was inspiring, and it continues to be inspiring 30 years down the line. So you have to do justice to that story, and yet you want to bring it home to the readers for them to feel, that they have really read a story which is worth reading. So that was really the challenge and the tight walk that I had to kind of do constantly, and look within myself and look at the writing, if I was doing the right thing or I was becoming too
Challenge was internal.
yeah, too filmy about it.
Yeah. Vikram?
Well, I think, the challenge of war reportage is that at the moment of war, you're circumspect about the degree of truth that you reveal. But there was one very clear thing in my mind when Kargil started, that this had been a huge higher command failure. And as the war was on, in the third week of May, I wrote an article in the Indian Express saying that this has been a blunder. But I restrained myself at that time. And over the years, with my research and my interviews with different officers and soldiers from both sides, I have been critical about why Kargil occurred, the failures in the first phase of the war. And despite being embedded in counterinsurgency and in Kargil with the troops, I was not like the American embedded war correspondents. I retained a critical view of higher command failures because we need to know the truth so that we don't repeat the Kargil blunder again, because our Jawans and young officers pay a very heavy price for being surprised.
Lovely. I think you must say hats off to that, because he retained his objectivity and balance despite being embedded. Probal, the unwritten.
So yes, Dr. Kesnur, there are so many stories that you can cover, but why this story? This is a story that encapsulates the entire 100-year span. The year 1915, the battle place is Neuve-Chapelle. 40,000 British Indian troops in an era where every third soldier was an Indian, were attacking the French village of Neuve-Chapelle, taking it back from Germany, which they did. They were faced with a heavy counterattack by the Germans. Among the Indian troops was a soldier, Subedar Manta Singh. Manta Singh was from the Ludhiana Sikhs, and Manta Singh was in that battle when he saw bullets flying as the Germans bombed and attacked the British troops. He saw his company commander, then Lieutenant George Henderson, fatally wounded, almost dying. What does Manta Singh do? He leaps up from the trenches, picks up Henderson, looks around, he sees a wheelbarrow, he deposits George Henderson into the wheelbarrow and wheels him out of the battle. In the process of doing that, Manta Singh's also hit. He's hit on in the abdomen and the shoulder. But after they've gone out of the battle, George Henderson recovers in 6 months. Manta Singh is taken to the hospital in Brighton 9 months later. Manta Singh's leg is amputated. 12 months later, Manta Singh dies. The news reaches Henderson. Henderson is shocked. He's sad. He wants to do something about it. He reaches out to Manta Singh's son, Asa Singh, in Punjab. He brings young Asa Singh over and gets him into the British Army. Incredible story. But it doesn't end there. Because in the Second World War, Asa Singh and George Henderson's son, Robert Henderson, fight shoulder to shoulder against Rommel's troops in North Africa. Amazing story that has continued over 2 generations. But the story doesn't end there. Why? Because India becomes an independent country. So you have 2 countries now. But the families are still linked to that trench of Neuve-Chapelle. So post-independence, Asa Singh's son Jaimal Singh and Robert Henderson's son Ian Henderson are in touch, and they have been in touch in the 60s and 70s and 80s. 3rd generation. Amazing? But the story doesn't end there. Where does the story go? Can we see the last slide? You know how the families look today?
Last slide. Show that last slide.
Every 2 years at the Chhatri Memorial, you know what's the Chhatri? The Chhatri Memorial in Brighton, in England, has a memorial for all Indian soldiers that fought in the First World War. Give me the last slide, please. And in that Chhatri Memorial, the 2 families get together every 2 years to celebrate that incident, that gallant deed of 1915 at Neuve-Chapelle. The families of Henderson and Manta Singh. This kind of encapsulates the entire 100-year saga. That's the story that I
think they haven't got that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've got 1 minute plus 2 or 3 minutes grace from the organizers. I have time for just 1 or 2 observations or short questions. So, yes, the lady here in 2nd row and the gentleman there. Just 2 very quickly.
Good afternoon, panelists, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Anju Gehlot, and my question is to all the panelists. So we know the change is constant. May I know, in the present scenario, what is patriotism?
What is patriotism in the present scenario?
According to panel.
Okay. After you, sir.
Very good afternoon to you all, sir. So my name is Sohrab. I'm a son of Group Captain Ashwini. My dad served during the Kargil War as well. He flew sorties. He was posted in Adhampur. Sir, I'm a filmmaker. I had 2 questions. One, how does the army see representation of army and the Indian Armed Forces in the Indian films? Are you guys happy with it? Are you satisfied with it? The other question is, why is so little written about POWs? Have we forgotten them like the rest of the society? Like, there's very little literature about them.
Okay. Vikram, you take the nationalism bit. You take the POWs bit. You'll take the POW? Okay, quickly.
So there is a story in Camouflage, Saurabh, that talks about the prisoner of war. And that's a story that I would urge you to, since you're looking for a POW story, that's a story that fell into my lap, courtesy Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramaniam, who's here, who connected me with somebody who told me his father was a prisoner in the Second World War. And he saw the entire World War through the lens of a prisoner, and he wrote a diary each day of his life in prison. We translated that diary from Punjabi to Hindi and English and rewrote it into a story. So that's the one. It gives another perspective, and you're right, those are the stories that must be told.
There's a very poignant prisoner of war story, and that is 244 Pakistani bodies are lying on our side of the Kargil LOC. And those boys will never go home because Pakistan disowns them. So they are forever POWs. Their families have no sense of closure. They can't put flowers on their graves. They can't say a prayer. They can't say a poem. And I've witnessed that burial of Pakistani soldiers during the war. So in my mind, that is a profoundly human tragedy of the war. That 244 soldiers and their families, there is no closure.
Come.
Creative dealing of the army, portrayal. So not everything is bad or wrong. There have been some amazing movies. Uri, Vijeta, I remember, was an amazingly well-made movie. Govind Nilani directed it. Hakikat, at a point of time, used to be very good. Uh, I think the problem comes in not understanding the essence of a mission and the role of the army. So if you have more military authors penning down the stories and getting into creative processes, we'll be able to deal with the subject uh, with realism and with the right portrayal. It's only when we shy away from it and we let someone else do the job, uh, there is a problem.
So, thank you. I'll just add my last one bit answer to everything. You want to know a little bit more about how movies are represented and how what do you think of them? We can have online discussions. It's something that Probal and I, and indeed I think all of us here feel strongly about. But you can have a separate panel on that, and we've had some discussions on that. As far as your nationalism question, ma'am, I think is the same that was there 50 years ago, same that was there 100 years ago. It's love for country. Nobody here is suggesting that people in the armed forces love their country more than the Aam Aadmi, the Aam Aurat. All of you love the country as much as we do, and we love India together. So I think that's a good way to end this. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to, I'm sorry sir, time is up. Give a big hand to all three authors. These are their books. I'd ask them to pose with them so that you can have a look, and they'll sign for these books after this. So please buy them in huge numbers and encourage our authors who are writing about military issues. Remember, this is still a cup half full. We want more of writing on war and military. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.